And then hemp was introduced in South America in the 1500s, and later in North America in the 1600s. You know, so just really gaining popularity. So the English settlers, you know, in the America began growing hemp to make just all sorts of stuff, to make some rope, to make sails, and to make fine clothing. And hemp was so important to them, to the farmers and to the people, that just a few years later, when they had the first General Assembly in Virginia, they created a law requiring farmers to grow hemp. And hemp was very important for them, that in the 1800s, taxes were paid with hemp for like over 200 years. Like they just used hemp to pay taxes because it was very valuable to them. And on the 17th and 18th century, they made it illegal for farmers not to grow hemp. So again, they were penalized if they're a farmer and they don't grow hemp. So the early economy of what is today the United States of America really depended on growing hemp plants. Isn't that amazing? And so American figures like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin were actively involved in the hemp industry. So you'll see all of this posters, like an American tradition, with their pictures, and it says, we grew and milled hemp. So that was, they were, you know, like they just really, really loved all of that. So now, you know, you think, okay, so let's pause there and say, okay, now if that's like super duper cool, like what happened? Like what happened? So interesting. So in the 19th century, there's a British physician that traveled to India and came back to Europe and reported about this amazing benefits of marijuana. And because of that, just like Marco Polo did, you know, earlier, like the interest in growing marijuana grew in Europe, and then it kind of spread later, you know, here in the United States. Around that same time, in the 1900s, the U.S. government created the Pure Food and Drug Act was created, and a law was passed that included marijuana together with alcohol, opium, morphine, cocaine, heroin, and others to be controlled. So that's kind of sort of like what it was back then. Like hemp was still good, but then, you know, with the introduction of marijuana, they said, no, that's a controlled substance and we need to regulate it. You know what? That's good. Okay, so then what happened next? Okay, so around 1910 and 1920s, this is kind of like the birth of the war against hemp. And there's just so many things going on that people, or several groups of people, were like so convinced, or like they have just so motivated to have a campaign, a bad smear campaign against hemp. So this is why. First, and this is true still today, pharmaceutical companies. Like there's growing research that hemp not only can have, you know, you can not only can use it for fine clothing or for paper or whatever, but you know, it also has a lot of medicinal properties. So the pharmaceutical companies were kind of, you know, like alarmed by that. And people, you know, they just grew hemp, you know, so they can kind of actually do their own thing and not buy from the pharmaceutical company. That alarmed them. So that's number one. Number two, the clothing industries. You know, growing hemp is so easy. We're going to discuss that. I have a slide on that. And it's very economical to grow hemp. And the way they harvest it, it doesn't take a lot of like chemicals or whatever, you know, to do it. So it's not only economical, it's very environment friendly. And so the clothing industry were kind of threatened by this really cheap, you know, derived hemp that is super useful. That's number two. Number three, there were a lot of large businessmen, you know, large-based businessmen that owned, you know, like acres and acres of timber, you know, landowners, and they really want the newspaper companies and the book companies, the paper companies to manufacture paper out of timber. So at that time, when you manufactured out of hemp. It doesn't require bleach because it's really white, like when you manufacture paper from hemp. So you don't require bleach, you don't require chemicals to make it white. And it is a lot stronger. So hemp is actually like cheaper and better for paper. But this same businessmen who own timber, like lands and lands of timber, they're also in the newspaper industry, and they're also in the you know, like paper industry. So they really campaign to make hemp like, you know, a really like something that's really fast. So they were kind of thinking, how can we do this? How can we do this? Around that time, 1910 to 1920, was the Mexican Revolution, and there were immigrants coming in, and there were first. Eco-friendly hemp. It takes 60 times less time to grow hemp compared to trees. So 4 months with hemp versus 20 years for trees. It just makes sense, you know, like that hemp with that you use hemp versus timber. 1 acre of hemp yields as much paper as 4 acres of trees. So hemp requires little water to grow. Hemp paper is naturally white and requires no or very little bleaching agent. And hemp can be grown without chemicals. They're resistant to pesticides and, you know, and insecticides. So, you know, as a farmer, you really don't need to use a lot of that. So that's why, you know, the farmers love hemp. So here comes the Mexican Revolution, and there's an influx of Mexican immigrants to the United States. And a lot of people did not like that, especially the ones that are also against hemp. And so the Mexicans, when they immigrated, they brought in recreational marijuana. And these people, you know, that are the businesses and the landowners and the pharmaceutical companies, they find it like a perfect timing to do a smear campaign, number one against the Mexicans as a kind of like a racial propaganda, and number two against hemp. So like this is to them, it's like this is an amazing opportunity. So politicians who want a name for themselves, you know, kind of led the way. And one particular guy who was, and this is in the 1930s now, who is the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. At that time, he was regulating opioids and cocaine and other drugs. And he felt, you know, for my bureau and me as a director, you know, like a power grab, to make it really, to make me look powerful, and for the bureau to make the bureau powerful, I need to add a few more substances to control. And at that time, like with backing of the pharmaceutical companies and all these politicians, he thought like marijuana would be perfect, you know. And so they named do you have a
I don't know after some of the chair, like chairs
there's one
down there.
right here. Oh, yes, there is.
Yeah.
Okay, so they wanted to use that term because it's kind of like a Hispanic term, like marijuana, to make it really kind of authentic Mexican. And because they hate hemp so much and they're just waiting for, you know, like to do a smear campaign of the hemp, they kind of made it to where hemp is also marijuana. And you can see, I love, are you reading this? Like, marijuana, a puff, a party, a tragedy, assassin of beauty. But anyway, it's very interesting, and sadly enough, they succeeded. They succeeded with this propaganda. So the very innocent and super awesome hemp was kind of bundled in with marijuana, and it was just horrible. That's the birth of, you know, the war against hemp, and they succeeded with that.
Fake news.
Back in the day, it was fake news. Yeah.
What happened today? I love that fake news.
So, isn't it interesting? All right. So in 1937, they had the Marijuana Tax Act. And when they say marijuana, that included hemp and marijuana. And so that was established, and they imposed taxes on the sale of hemp and marijuana. So it's kind of like bundled in together. And they did not criminalize the possession of it.